Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
We are going to begin, well actually Rabbi Shapiro is going to begin, and we're talking today about Parashat Shelach, which is also known sometimes as Parashat Shelach Lecha.
Why do you do Shelach? I say Shelach Lecha. Why do you say Shelach?
Because that's the name of the Parsha.
The name of Parasha Shelach Lecha.
Okay. I will let Rabbi Shapiro take us through a little summary before we get to our verse.
Getting into some interesting narrative over the next couple of weeks. So this is the story about someone from each tribe is sent over into the land of Canaan. Spoiler alert, it doesn't go in. This is agents here, which sounds cool. Secret agent Israelites. God is Moses saying, send these people out into the land. A lot is spoken about Shelach Lecha because he's being told, send for yourself. Like this is something that y'all seem to need, right? You should just trust me, but all y'all seem to need some additional scouting. So sending someone from each tribe to go scout out the land. We get a nice list, Israelites, one from each tribe. They go into the land. Moses says, here is your mission, should you choose to accept it. Tell us what you find. Is it a good country, a bad country? Are the towns they live in open or fortified? Which is always one of the first things I consider moving somewhere. Is it wooded or not? And bring back some fruit. Great. So they did that. Says verse 21, they went up and down and all around the town, and they got a big old bunch of grapes. So if you've ever seen that art, that shows two dudes carrying a big old bunch of grapes. And it's Bamidbar 1323 is where we hear about the big old bunch of grapes. So they bring the grapes back and they come back after 40 days, which as we know is a classic time period of the Torah. They go right to Moshe and Aharon and the whole community, and they made their report. And here is what they said. It is indeed Eretz Zavat Chalav Chalav. Thank you so much. It is a land filled with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, big old bunch of grapes and or milk and honey notwithstanding, there's big old scary people there. And the cities are in fact fortified, and we saw the Anakites, giants there. There's a lot of people there in all of these areas, and they start freaking everybody out. Verse 30, Caleb then hushed the people before Moses and said, we can do it. Let us by all means go up and we shall gain possession of it, or we shall surely overcome it. And even interesting to note, and we might very well talk about this as we get into the verse we have so carefully selected, that he's not disputing any of the facts. What he's disputing is the interpretation, which I think is very interesting. He's not confusing the data with the perspective on the data. That's interesting. Be that as it may, he says, we can do this. But everybody else says, no way, Jose, we can't. We can't go up against that people. They are stronger than us. Then they spread calumnies, which is a word that we don't use nearly often enough in this world. Rabbi Schatz, when was the last time you used the word calumny?
I don't think ever.
All right, you should work on that, please. Okay. Rabbi Schatz, do you know what a calumny is?
Sorry.
The silence speaks loudly.
No, I said no.
Oh, you said no. Whatever it is, they spread it about the Israelites, about the land they had scouted, saying this country that we went around and scouted is one that devours its settlers, and all of the people that we saw there are of great size. They are They are very big old humans, as they say. Calumny, by the way, the making of false and defamatory statements in order to damage someone's reputation. Slander is what a calumny is. Okay, don't worry. Hey, we actually made it to the verse we're going to look at today. So we are going to dive into but one verse, chapter 13, verse 33. Visham ra'inu et hanfilim. There we saw the, Nephilim. Bnei Anak, min hanfilim. The sons of Anak, the Anakites, are from the Nephilim. I'll get back to that in a second. Vanehi ve'enenu kechagavim. And we were in our own eyes as grasshoppers. Vechen hayinu ve'enei. And so indeed, yea, verily, and forsooth, we must have been in their eyes as well. So just sort of a quick vocab thing. Anak means big, like giant, right? And the Nephilim are, if you go back into some of the weirder passages of Breshit, the Nephilim are talked about. They're sort of these like proto-mythical, half-human, half-divine creatures. Bring the weirdness of Torah back, because it sure is in there. But sort of hearkening back to this mythological sense of there's these huge, strong, powerful creatures there. They're these giants, and we saw ourselves as grasshoppers, and so too they saw us. I have a lot to say about this. The only sort of prompting, I was convinced, by the way, that I'd spoken about this verse at Beth Am, that Rabbi Schatz and I had taught about it last year, because I love this verse. I think it is one of the most psychologically rich psukim in the entire Torah. I wrote about it in a Taste of Torah 3 years ago, I found, but apparently I haven't talked about it before. So I'll just say that I think it is relatively rare for the Torah to give us such a deep window into the psychology of what anyone in the Torah is thinking or experiencing. And I think this offers a really interesting window into that. I have lots more to say about it, but I shan't.
All right. Let's take some kushiyot here, some questions. I first saw Karen. So Karen, you go first.
So above in verses before this, God gave us that land.
Uh-huh.
And he filled it with these people.
Right.
And then he says, go ahead. It's your land. Go in. See what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a little trap.
Oh, interesting. So why did God lead us towards this land that he was giving us, but then we have issues?
Now, I understand that's a joke, that word, but that we are challenged.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to mute you. Sorry. Unmute.
Karen, you're now in the esteemed company.
I was trying to move you so I could see you.
Muted by Rabbi Schatz.
It's love. I do know love.
I was trying to move you so I could see you, and I pressed the button.
Company.
Okay, go ahead.
Anyway, I do think, have heard, God challenges us lots and lots and lots of times.
Yeah.
Not giving freely, but making us work for it.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what this is about. But I can't get my head around why he gave us the land, but in the land are people who may kill us.
Great. So I think there are, as you just mentioned, I think there are multiple times, unfortunately or fortunately, in our Torah that we have to deal with this theology, right? That God somehow actually pushes us towards a scenario in which we might not be successful, or one in which we might find ourselves somehow, the underdogs, right? We might somehow now be in a way in which we're not going to be able to accomplish that which we wanted to accomplish, or be able to defend ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really great point, and a theological, conundrum that unfortunately, maybe even still today, we think about in certain ways. Yeah.
And it may also be about faith in God.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, not also.
I think it's a lot about, from my perspective, I think there's the psychological piece, and I think this whole episode is very interesting to interpret through the lens of faith and trust, for my money.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. Renee.
So two things. One, I'm thinking along some of the same things that Karen was saying, is like, this is just yet another example of God testing us, bringing us, like with Pharaoh, and bringing us to these calamities in this land. How can you bring us to this dry land and you don't give us any food, or you don't give us any water? It's another test. But the other part that I was kind of curious about is if we're going to be compared to something, why grasshoppers?
Interesting.
Of all the insects or of all the creatures that we could have looked like and been compared to, why grasshoppers?
Yeah. Great. I don't have an answer. I don't know if Rabbi Shapiro has an answer or not, but it is interesting, right? There are many other, I don't know, creatures that we could have been associated with, especially that have actually been mentioned in the Torah before, right? Like in the story of Bereshit, why not then be connected to a snake, right? Like that was kind of the creature to be negatively associated with. So it is interesting.
The locusts even.
Yeah, I think probably grasshoppers are pretty close to what locusts are, but yes, just in general, like why are we being connected to a specific creature? Great. Mike.
I'd like to try to go to the psychological thing that Rabbi Shapiro is talking about. I think when you look, if you see yourself as a grasshopper, it's not particularly attractive.
Yeah.
And so then you're imagining yourself as you must look to the people that are there. I would think that you have a pretty poor self-image of yourself. So if you are I would ask, as my kushya, whether or not that is what Rabbi Shapiro is getting at, in the sense that the psychological dimension of this is if you're not ready, these scouts are not ready to go forward. And so that's my question.
Great. I think we are going to definitely get to that. That is certainly one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this verse. And I believe that is part of what Rabbi Shapiro also finds curious about the way that this is spoken about. And just interesting that you picked up on exactly what I never actually focused on, the fact that we first call ourselves grasshoppers before they can call us grasshoppers, right? So we are somehow acknowledging for ourselves
they don't call us grasshoppers.
No, meaning like that we think that they think that we are grasshoppers.
Correct.
Like that our perception is only actually based on how we perceive of ourselves. Which is not how we tell the story, right? So we talk about, we just talk about the opposite, right? How we were seen, but we don't necessarily talk about the fact that just came all from our own minds. So I think you're right, Mike, and we're going to get definitely deeply into that, with some of the sources. Tybal, go ahead, and then Alan.
I'm sorry if someone already said this. I'm having a little trouble, concentrating, but part of where I went, and again, sorry if I'm repeating, is I'm just fascinated by the Nephilim, whom we know from early in Bereshit, but it's how would all these generations later, this, to me, not very important group of beings, how would that knowledge be so top of mind? I mean, it just, I don't know. It's just what did I mean, given that we now, despite Midrashim, don't know that much about Nephilim and who they were, how is that top of mind for these spies in this generation to say, oh, that's who they were?
Great. So Renee brought up a similar question, and I think it is definitely interesting. And I didn't find so much on this. It wasn't my focus, but I also didn't see so much on the specific use of this creature. Maybe Rabbi Shapiro did, but it is definitely interesting in terms of why be so specific, and then based on specificity, why this particular creature. Alan, go ahead.
I've always been fascinated that the spies start off, giving a very, good report. They start off saying, well, it's a beautiful land, things, but they have no self-confidence. It's like they've experienced all these great things that God has helped them all the way through, seeing the 10 plagues, being able to cross the Red Sea. And it's like it never happened. They cry out for manna. And they say the food, they're crying out again now. It says we'll never be able to defeat them. They have no belief, no focus that anything positive is going to happen. Yeah. And I just don't know. It's always so. How can it be that people, if those people if Bnei Israel who've experienced firsthand those intense miracles from Hashem, how can it be for us who we necessarily, we can experience miracles each and every day, but not on a level that's going on here that is truly altering, life-changing in terms of their progression. It's always been one of the things that has very much troubled me about this story of Bnei Israel. How can it be so?
Interesting. Thank you for that perspective. Okay, Joanna, Karen, and then Denise. Wow, lots of kushiyot today, or comments.
It's a great verse.
I know.
It's a great verse. How have you never looked at this before, Schatz? Come on.
Let's just shame
Rabbi Schatz. Rabbi.
Okay, keep going.
Me?
No. Joanna.
You called on me, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, 3 comments. One is, I think about in this story, and then my mind drifts to other stories in Tanakh, where, we talk about, the group mentality and group persuasion, right? So here, the golden calf, Korach, and one wonders also if that's, sort of part of the test, like, you have to be able to judge for yourselves and stand up to that. 2 is the phrase, the Bnei Anak are part of the Nephilim. Yeah. Reads to me almost like an insert into the verse. So suggesting to me that there's like some editing going on here. And then that has me wondering about if what comes after that is part of the original, or was that added later by the editor to sort of, kind of explain what was going on here and put, layer a level of interpretation upon that. And 3 is when we're talking about perceptions, then grasshoppers to me is a fascinating little creature to talk about it. Because if you would ask me, like, what is my perception? Are grasshoppers kosher to eat? From my general knowledge of like creepy crawly critters, I would say, no, they're not. Yeah. But in fact, there's an exception, and grasshoppers are not seemingly what we perceive them to be, because they are in fact kosher to eat.
Interesting. So you think that maybe they, based on kind of their status, that we're now being compared to them, which is that'd be an interesting drash on, then what do we think of in terms of ourselves, and that which we can't. That which we wouldn't expect from our just general being. It's really interesting. I've definitely never thought about that before. But lovely to have you back, because you always bring those really deep perceptions. So I'm glad you're here. Karen, go ahead. Okay,
so getting to the psychological part of this.
Yeah.
It's a projection of how we feel about ourselves. We project onto others. Correct. And say, oh, that's what they think of us.
Yeah.
And the thought that came to me is, well, we're not Israelis yet.
Right.
Now, Israelis, my view is strong and this, and they could do anything, and yes, and we'll do it. Well, we're not there yet. Okay. But think of a little kid, right, who's afraid of X, Y, or Z. And we say, we'll be right there with you. We get on the bike. I'll hold the bike to this and this and this. And that's how we kind of learn, hopefully, how not to be scared and to see there's a learning process of fear and all that. So again, the big guy or woman is teaching us stuff. Yeah.
I don't want to say too much on that because I think that's precisely the direction that we're going to actually go in. I don't know if Rabbi Shapiro wants to say anything, but I think you're spot on in terms of where we're gonna take this first. Denise.
So kind of building what Karen said and also what Alan was saying about, and this is always how it was taught in school also, like, oh my God, they saw all these miracles. How could they not believe in that? But then maybe that's there to teach us that that's not how you build a relationship. Yeah. And because even like, in personal relationships, like when someone love bombs you, that's actually a red flag. When someone just love bombing is like, when you just meet someone and they're just all of a sudden like, oh my God, you're everything to me. And they open up about their whole life and they give you a million presents, but you haven't earned that. You don't know them yet. And so it's sort of dangerous to trust people in that situation.
I see.
And so maybe that's like a little bit of what happened too with God and the Jewish people is like, it was a little bit of a love bomb, like the Red Sea and the plagues and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then like staying in the desert for 40 years has resulted this thing. It's always marketed as like a punishment, but maybe it was a blessing. Maybe it was a chance to say, okay, let's actually work on this relationship. And let's give you a chance to have something to hold on to that's real and everyday.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought it to relationships because I was talking to my friend who's also a rabbi, the one who I'm here to help with her kids. Last night, she has 2 weddings this weekend, and I mentioned this verse to her because I thought that this actually, as you're pointing out, is a really great verse when talking about relationships. It really does show you that that you need to still maintain a specific recognition of who you are before you can give yourself completely over to someone else. And that if you decide that your perception of yourself is one that, like they are saying here, is like grasshoppers, well, then you're going to end up, being down about yourself and feeling small and feeling taken advantage of. And potentially, that is being aided by the partner. But potentially it's also partially on you for not being able to kind of see yourself through the relationship. So I think that it's a really interesting, you took it in a different direction, but that's what it made me think about, in terms of how we continue to stay strong and hold ourselves accountable while being able to grow, but obviously, and be, influenced by those around us positively, but being sure that we have that strong foundation of who we are. Mike, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Rabbi Shapiro.
Just a comment on what Denise said, and that is that when you're not familiar with something, you're going to be reticent, you're going to be unsure of yourself. Yeah. And really, they didn't have all the mitzvot. And I'm thinking really about something that Aviva Richman, Rabbi, she said in her Hadar Devar today or yesterday, that when you don't have something familiar, or take for instance, I think she used tzitzi.
Yeah.
And
that's in this Parasha also.
You don't have that. You don't have that feeling that brings you in, that makes you feel included, and so it makes you feel small. If you first go to a synagogue and you don't know anybody and you don't know the custom, then you feel out of place. And it's necessary to to get familiar, to have community there with you, to build that. So,
yeah. Sure. Okay, Rabbi Shapiro.
That's me.
Great.
So along the lines of what a lot of folks have been talking about, and it speaks to the grasshopper piece a little bit, I'm going to actually share directly a nice little. I'm helping out with camp today, so in case you hear my walkie-talkie, that is our summer camp's in action. But I'm not going to bring the camera down to show you guys the summer camp. Okay. So this is out of Masechet Sota. Should we talk about Sota? Is that a good topic to talk about today, Rabbi Schatz? Probably not. But it's out. What? Oh, you're muted, but that's probably good. Okay. So
I was just saying that I brought this same piece of text, but if we talked about soda, it has nothing to do with what we're about to talk about.
I know. So in this bit o Gemara, as the rabbis call it, in exploring this, a verse from just one verse up, Rabbi taught, God said, I intended the land to appear to consume its inhabitants for their own good, but they considered this proof the land was bad. I intended it for their good by causing many people to die there. Problematic theology. We'll parking lot that for a second. Causing many people to die there so that anywhere the spies arrived, the most important of them died, so that the Canaanites would be preoccupied with mourning and would not inquire about them. They'll be so distracted by mourning that they won't be noticed. I'm going to skip the Job piece because it's a whole nother ball of wax. However, the spies considered this proof that the land was bad and said it is a land that consumes its inhabitants. So I'll just pause there for a second to say, again, going back into this idea that I briefly surfaced when talking through this verse, there are the facts and there's the way that we interpret the facts, right? So seeing what they're seeing, maybe God didn't do a great job of framing what was happening there, but God's presenting it in a certain way and the Israelites are seeing it another way. Okay. The spies said, and we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were in theirs. And here's you don't meet many people with this name anymore. Rav Misharshia said, Rabbi Schatz, when you have your firstborn child, you must name him Misharshia. Can we work on that? Great. Misharshia Schatz. He gets your last name, it seems. Rav Misharshia said, the spies were liars. Okay. They said we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes. That's fine. But to say, and so we were in their eyes, from where could they have known this, right? So a lot of folks have started touching on this. It's one thing to articulate your self-image. It's another thing entirely to assume or think you know how other people are seeing you. I actually have no idea how any of you see me. I might think I do, but I don't. Why? I'm not you. The way I see myself, though, might impact how I think you see me, and I might take certain actions because of that. But unless I actually communicate with you, going back to what Rabbi Schatz was saying about how this is sort of interesting fodder for food for thought in terms of talking about relationships, I actually can't know. The only way I can know is I can say, hey, what do you think of me? Right? How do you see me? So how could they have known this? When the Canaanites were having the mourner's meal, right? So building on that first chunk, they had the meal beneath cedar trees. And when the spies saw them, they climbed up in the trees and sat in them. From there, they heard the Canaanites saying, we see people who look like grasshoppers in the trees. So two pieces here. One is the sort of psychological assertion that a lot of us are picking up on, the challenge of the Israelites assuming things. And then the Gemara sort of inserts this interesting idea saying, oh, it's not that they made this assumption. There's this weird little narrative thing that happened. The Canaanites were mourning their dead and they were underneath the trees, and the Israelites clambered up into the trees, and all of a sudden the Canaanites noticed them and said, oh, look, there's grasshoppers up there. That's why it's grasshoppers. That's what's going on there. Now, I don't know the most plausible for what's happening here. But A, it's an interesting explanation for why grasshoppers. B, it also gets a little bit into the challenge of the Israelites making this assumption, which I think is really problematic. And C, sort of calls into question as to whether that was or was not grounded in fact. I want to add in sort of like another, it's a slight digression, which for me means it's very focused, in terms of, Alan was asking the question, a couple of other people were naming it as well, about how can they think this? How can they see themselves this way? How can they be complaining like this, scared like this, given everything that's happened? Change isn't linear, you know? Just because I act differently now than I did yesterday doesn't mean tomorrow I won't backslide into the way that I was yesterday. That's not a given, you know? And so I think saying about the Israelites, they were slaves, they've been freed, they got Torah, they crossed the sea. Why are they so scared? Well, it's scary, you know? No one's disputing the fact that there's a lot of people in the land. No one's disputing the fact even that they're big, you know? That's scary. Change is scary. And it makes sense to me. It doesn't mean they're the most psycho-spiritually advanced folks around, but I think it does make sense to me that it's not necessarily just a given that the Israelites are saying, we got this, let's go. Even if there are, of course, other problematic pieces to this. So I could talk a lot more about these, but I want to make sure to leave room for Rabbi Schatz, who is not a grasshopper.
I brought the same piece. I didn't bring the whole story. I just brought the piece about, that they were liars. Because I just think it's an interesting way of framing that, you know, being a liar is someone that's not telling the truth. And yet I think that very often when someone feels down about themselves, especially in terms of a physical appearance, which this seems to be in terms of strength, physicality, et cetera, they're not lying. They're telling you what they're telling you what they feel and how they feel. And though you might see it as untrue, it's still not a lie because it's how they're actually feeling and what they're actually experiencing. And I know in working with people who have had whether eating disorders or some mental health challenges, I will call them, undiagnosed, but, you know, mental health challenges, that very often you can't just tell a person, no, you're wrong. You can't say that's not your reality, because it is their reality. It might not be the reality, but it is their reality. And so that to me is what really stuck out in that. I'm really having a hard time with English today. I've had very little sleep. I'm not used to having 2 children to look after.
Oh my God, that sounds exhausting. I mean, how are you doing? Gosh.
They're not my children.
Watching kids and working?
I know. But so just the general
Impossible.
And sleeping on an air mattress. But the general idea of being aware of other people's struggles such that you don't have to tell them that they're wrong, but helping them through them. And so it does seem like it was pretty realistic for them to think that they saw them the way that they saw themselves, because how could you think otherwise? Sforno actually has a really interesting comment that says, they did not bother to harm us as they did not think we represented a threat to them. So again, like, they're seeing themselves as less significant, not because they actually are, but they're thinking, oh, well, no one's going to come and bother us because look how bad we are, right? We're so insignificant that why would anybody even try? So I don't know, that to me was the thing that really threw me off. It's a very different way of telling the story than we typically talk about it. We typically blame the others for saying that we looked like grasshoppers. We very rarely talk about how we indicated that for ourselves and believed that into existence.
It's fascinating that you keep saying how we tell the story. I always focus on this, so this is not news to me. But when you said that,
when I generalize a whole population, I'm not usually only specifically talking about you. So
right, but when you generalize a whole population, you're also saying that no one must have noticed this. So I'm just saying some of us have noticed this. Some of us might have noticed, like our Mefarshim, for example, might have noticed this before. But what I was going to say, no, they haven't. They just noticed it last night. They wrote all this stuff overnight. They slapped it on Sephardia, and now we are able to. Anyway, what came to mind when Rabbi was saying this just now, before I made her feel bad, is I'm a grasshopper. I don't know, like this idea of 12 people walking around a land, right? And they're seeing themselves as tiny because people aren't seeing them as threats. Like, if you're a well-established society and you see just like 12 random dudes walking around, you're not going to think, oh my God, 12 people, what are we going to do? Right? You're going to think, all right, well, whatever. They can have some grapes. Who cares? You know what I mean? So it's interesting as well that like their sense of themselves is so low that they're like, how could they not? They're like almost looking for that validation of, they have to be, right? Why aren't they scared of us? They should be scared of us. They're not scared of us. Oh my God, we must be so lowly. Like 12 people wandering around a land is not a particular threat to a well-established population.
Right, but I think to go back, I don't remember who said this, but I think to go back to the statement of like, well, then why did God send us there in the first place, right? Like that's, I don't know.
Send us there meaning send the spies or send us there as people?
Send us there as a people, right? Like regardless of how many of them there were. It's an interesting take. I hadn't thought about that, but I do think that if you're being sent and being told you're going to be successful by God, then feeling as though you are lesser than, at least to me, seems to be more deeply rooted than just there are only 12 of us.
Yeah, I would say, I think those are two slightly different things. I think one is the experience of the 12 spies and their sense of how big or small they are. The other is the question of having faith, trusting that they'll be able to enter the land and be successful. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be really difficult, mm-hmm. Which are related. But I think there's, and yeah, I mean, why? It's the promised land. It's just that simple. Helpful.
Okay, there are lots of hands. So Denise,
is that a helpful geopolitical take? Is that a good? Just throw that out in the hopper today as well? Hopper! Hopper. Very good.
All right.
Very
Denise.
good. Hopper is the lead single from the Masharshias. Thank you, Denise, for catching that band name. I almost missed it. Masharshias. Schatz and the Masharshias. No. Rabbi Schatz is not entertained by my answer.
I think I should be Matt and the Masharshias.
Matt and the Masharshias.
Okay. We just don't have that much time, but I want to hear what people have to say. So Denise, go ahead.
So it's interesting when you say that, about people's perceptions and that it's not, you can't just tell someone, well, you're wrong or that's not true because that's their reality. And it seems like that's what God did is he kind of validated the people's reality because he could have said, no, you're wrong. We're going in. Let's march. And he didn't do that. He's, you need more time. You need to chill, whatever it is. And I think it gets presented really harshly in the story, like for marketing purposes. But when you look at just the facts of what happened, it seems kind of compassionate.
Interesting. That's a really interesting look at it, and a much nicer one, and more feel good one. Karen, go ahead.
I may have said this before. It's like a mantra. Feelings and thoughts are automatic. Mm-hmm. Behavior we have control over. Mm-hmm. So although we can see and think, and I'm too small, and I'm this and I'm that. I was telling my daughter, just give that part of you a name. Mm-hmm. And tell her to go sit over there for a while when she's with you. And then you acknowledge that she's here, but you know what? Let's put the other foot forward. And so there is a way to deal with all the feelings and thoughts, which don't say that's who you are totally.
That's
one of the most memorable and impactful teachings I got on the meditation retreat I went on, just as a reminder, once a long silent meditation retreat years ago, back when I was even louder, if you can believe it. But one of the most impactful teachings was very much along those lines, Karen, that your thoughts are just your thoughts. They're not necessarily true assessments of the world around you, right? Like, we get habituated that my thought is automatically true. But it's just a thought, and thoughts ebb and flow and change over time. And I think, your point about separating thought from behavior, that's part of what makes us people, right? Is that hopefully we have the discipline and the ability to differentiate between the immediate thought or the immediate impulse. And
that's what makes us grown-ups, not people.
Well, some of us.
Because, right. It has to be a grown-up thinking person who kind of says,
sure. That makes sense. That's part of what maturity is, to be able to know when to pause. Yeah.
All right, Alan.
We began with the machloket, whether it should be shlach or shlach lecha. And it really is important here, it says, because if you say shlach, it means, okay, you're going to go and you're going to be able to conquer it. That's it. Shlach lecha is take for yourself. As Rabbi Shapiro indicated, it's not, you're doing it on your own for your own accord. I'm otherwise going to grant it to you. But the people had doubts. Those doubts are manifested even more so later on, and I think in the pasuk or two that follows where we stopped, which is one of my favorite Rashis, which said that we're not going to be able to survive because they are gadol mimenu. They are greater than us. Rashi says you can also read mimenu as greater than him, meaning greater than God. So the people had such a low self-esteem that even though they were promised this land, and even though they experienced all these other things, that even the leaders of 10 of the 12 tribes were willing to acknowledge that they were going to be able to be brought into the land. And it is for that reason that the Torah says that these people are not going to be going into the land. That was their punishment for not being able to accept it. And I think many people think it's because of what they did at the golden calf. It's for here vis-a-vis the spies that take so place. And it says that when they think that these Nephilim, whoever they may be, are greater than God and they have no confidence that they're going to be able to succeed, then their mission for Shlach Lecha turns out to be a disaster for them.
Very interesting. A nice, beautiful drash. Joanna.
On a week when we're talking about language and perception and how that affects our thoughts, I think it's worthy to note that we keep referring to the 12 spies, but nowhere in our Parsha are they actually called spies. What we're doing is layering onto this week's Parsha the retelling in Devarim where they are called spies. All they are scouts. And as we were sitting here, I remember an incredibly funny Dvar Torah a friend of mine did on this week's Parsha, where he started by writing a little playlet where he pulled up his son to help him. And he was Moses going to present to the Shin Bet this spy mission of like 12 people marching around the land together. That's not a spy mission. A spy mission is what we have in the Haftarah this week. The two spies, they're secretive, they're hiding, they're eavesdropping. So it's really interesting, how does our perception of what happened change when we refer to them as spies and not scouts? And how did the Deuteronomy version happen? Was that Moses' recall of the event? Is that how Hashem told Moshe to recall the event? And then, how that affects like Jewish history forever in terms of this episode.
Yeah. That's great. And I think it's interesting for us to also like when we talk about Abraham and the angels, right? We often talk about them as angels because that's what we want them to see them as, but actually they're just people, right? And so how are we throughout Torah? How are we influenced by the way in which we tell the story, and that then defines for us who either the characters are or the outcome of the story. Whereas if we just look at the text, right, does it tell us actually a very different narrative that we could be following along? Tybal, last thing, and then we will have Rabbi Shapiro kind of close us out here.
Karen's comment reminded me of something.
Yeah.
The thought action, but in this case it's action thought, which are the very robust psychological studies that show, and they're robust, peer reviewed, all those things, that if human beings are asked to smile and use the muscles in their face, that their mood improves.
Yes.
And
right.
The way that I think that relates to the Parsha, actually, and Karen reminded me, is that rabbinically, one of the things we're supposed to do as Jews, and sometimes even bend over backwards, is give the benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Like, come up with the most convoluted excuse or something for why even a bad guy might have a good reason for doing something, which can be very difficult, but certainly in day-to-day life, if we try giving benefit of the doubt, at least in the beginning, I think it makes interpersonal relationships easier. So maybe one way to look at the connection of this Parsha is that wandering in the desert, they had to learn how to give things the benefit of the doubt. Because this, in Shelach, whatever that Nephilim thing is, but certainly a land that eats whatever, that's not giving the land the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
But I think it gets better later in the Torah.
Yeah. Rabbi Shapiro, you can have the last word. I don't know if anybody can hear, but E-I-E-I-O is happening very loudly a few doors down. So I'm going to let Rabbi Shapiro take the final word.
A gross misspelling of farm.
What?
Old MacDonald had a farm, F-A-R-M, not E-I-E-I-O. That's not how you spell farm.
True.
It's a joke. I make jokes sometimes.
It's like, I don't understand what that has to do with anything, but yes. Okay, go ahead. Your turn.
Pronounced E-I-O. It was a joke. I'll explain it later. First of all, my friends, an announcement about our class. After next week, we are going to take a indefinite hiatus. So I'm sure, yes, Typo. So just giving y'all a heads up. There will be opportunities where Rabbi Schatz will continue to teach. I will continue to teach. You will get to see me torture her plenty of other places around the institution. But just as a heads up, we are going to pause the class after next week for an indefinite period of time.
Pause for how long?
An indefinite period of time.
Do we get a vote?
No.
We're trying to figure out what it looks like to be able to bring back some of the things that we also stopped when the pandemic began. So because Rabbi Shapiro and I, after 2 weeks from today, are going to both be away at certain times, it was already going to be that we were doing one-on, solo teaching.
And then it's going to be in the summer, and then Tishrei,
and the high holidays. So we're just reevaluating, and we will see what happens. But all of our classes, except for like Rabbi Klickfeld's Chumash class and my Midrashah class, like things that I've been continuing on even pre-COVID, those will continue, but then certain things that started just because of COVID, we're just trying to reevaluate how, where, when, all those kinds of things. So
will our vote help you reevaluate?
You're more than welcome to vote. It's not really a democracy, though I feel badly saying that today. But you are welcome. You are welcome to vote.
Yes, Harris. It's all your fault. You came too straight and it's like,
It is definitely not your fault. In fact, we were a little bit swayed to potentially even continue because you and Joanna were here. So,
look how many people from out of state you have coming to your class.
We know. Okay, I really have to go. This is lovely, and we don't feel super guilty right this second, though we might next week. But
okay, so my bow. What I was sitting here thinking, as we were talking about, not the spies, the scouts. Thank you, Joanna, for that clarification. It's an important one. Is that all things considered, 1 out of 6 ain't bad. Given everything these people have experienced, given the fear, given the uncertainty, I would flip this around. 1 out of these 6 scouts saw everything that was happening and said, hey, we can do this. Which in a really tough, challenging, scary situation, to have 16+% of the people involved say, hey, we can do this, not bad, actually. There was a really, really interesting article by Dr. Jane Shapiro that just got sent out this morning, one of the co-founders of Orot, which does some really interesting Jewy stuff outside Chicago and online. And she was exploring this idea. I'm going to put a link in the chat to the article that she referenced, which I have not read in full yet. But this idea of socially distributed cognition, that we don't just think for ourselves, that we sort of put our heads together and we think collectively, which is not to say that we can see ourselves the way other people see us, but in terms of asking and trying to answer the question of the ways in which our thoughts can impact the thoughts of others for good and for not so good. And how calumny was spread, right? Because that thought was kind of a runaway train. But then the inverse is also true, that it's hopefully possible as well for the ways in which we're able to separate out thought and action, and the ways in which we're able to see the world as it actually is, and the way we're able to put good stuff out in the world. It's possible in the positive direction as well. And so that, I guess that's the bow for the day, right? That we need to be careful and mindful about how our thoughts can lead us astray and not necessarily be accurate interpretations of the world around us. That's true. And if even in such a desperate and difficult time, right off the bat, 16+% of people can say, hey, here's a positive way of approaching this. Maybe we can learn something from that as well.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.